Welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm Cheryl McKenzie. Today we're putting the federal Liberal government and its promise to reconcile with Indigenous people in focus. We want you to join our conversation. Our phone lines are open. Call us toll free at 1-877-647-2786. You can also tweet us at APTN InFocus or email infocus@aptn.ca. Before I introduce you to our guest, let's set the scene with a memorable clip from Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
It is time for a renewed nation-to-nation relationship with First Nations peoples. One that understands that the constitutionally guaranteed rights of First Nations in Canada are not an inconvenience, but a sacred obligation. One that is based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. One that is guided by the spirit and intent of the original treaty relationship. One that respects inherent rights, treaties, and jurisdictions, and one that respects the decisions of our courts. I know that renewing our relationship is an ambitious goal, but I am equally certain that it is one that we can and will achieve if we work together.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaking to the Assembly of First Nations last December on his commitment to renew the relationship between the federal government and Indigenous people, making it a priority. And he included the following paragraph in every ministerial mandate letter: "No relationship is more important to me and to Canada than the one with Indigenous peoples." It's time for a renewed nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous peoples based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. That's really actually the first time that those mandate letters to the ministers were made public, and they're all really very interesting. We're going to pick apart that language just a little bit as we go here today. A little more than a year into office, have the tides changed for the Liberals? Do you have faith in the election promises to fix that relationship with Indigenous peoples in Canada? Joining me in studio is Indigenous environmentalist and activist lawyer Caleb Bain. In Halifax, we have Cheryl Maloney, president of the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association. Joining us from Ottawa is Tony Belcourt. Tony is the founding president of the Métis Nation of Ontario. And on the phone, from Kitigan-Zibi, we have a former longtime chief, Gilbert Whiteduck. Thank you very much and good afternoon to you all. 1 year into the mandate, Caleb, is the honeymoon over?
Respectfully, what you do matters more than what you say. In my opinion, coming from the area where they approved Site C, where Pacific Northwest LNG was approved, even while there was meetings scheduled with chiefs from that territory, in my opinion, what you do matters more than what you say, and what they said was lovely. Big, beautiful words with lots of potential, but we live in a time where the actual actions of a government should dictate our understanding of that government. And unfortunately, I think Mr. Trudeau and his actions speak louder than his words.
And Cheryl, there was a lot of excitement around a new government. Is the honeymoon over for you with the Liberals?
Well, if you look at the soft things on the ground in the communities, we could feel some impact from the Trudeau government around education, veterans, some of the easier, softer issues. But the hard issues, I stood in court yesterday and the day before at the Nova Scotia Supreme Court and heard the province of Nova Scotia state that the Mi'kmaq have no need or no duty to consult the Mi'kmaq, that there's no treaties here, and there's, to me, there's no honor of the Crown. And one of the things we've been reaching out to the federal government and the Trudeau government to do is to stand with Indigenous peoples against some of these projects and some of the actions of the provincial governments. But we've reached out several times to the Federal Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, Environment, Indigenous Affairs, and the Prime Minister himself to not only speak about protecting Aboriginal rights, but to actually come into our territories and intervene and protect the species. These are all federal mandates, and this government has been silent.
All right, Tony, let's go to you. What do you think about the Liberals after 1 year in office?
Well, we're seeing some conflicts, obviously, or conflicting outcomes. Caleb mentioned certainly those issues. On the other hand, with the Métis Nation, I'm happy to see that there are some things being done towards the minister's mandate. In the letter, it said that she's to work on a nation-to-nation basis with the Métis Nation to advance reconciliation and renew the relationship based on cooperation, respect for rights, international obligations, and commitment to end the status quo. I thought this morning was really an important day. It was an historic one for the Métis Nation because for the first time ever in our history in Canada, the Métis Nation flag was raised at Parliament Hill. And this took place on November the 16th, which is the anniversary of the hanging of Louis Riel. It's a day we celebrate in terms of celebrating Riel's life and his legacy. It's a small thing, some people might say, it might be symbolic, but you know, I first set foot on Parliament Hill 45 years ago, and quite honestly, I hadn't thought about the day that we would be raising a flag, the Métis Nation flag. It's very important to us that these sorts of symbolic things take place. Now, yesterday, the Manitoba Métis Federation signed an important framework agreement that will include discussions on outstanding issues concerning the Métis Treaty. I understand that the Métis Nation of Ontario and others, perhaps the Métis Nation of Alberta, are also in discussions on developing a framework agreement that will lead toward a nation-to-nation relationship. As you know, in the Powley case, the Supreme Court of Canada did declare that Métis rights were still existing, that the Métis rights in the community of Sault Ste. Marie specifically were never extinguished in the Robinson Treaties of 1850. So we do have a lot to go on. We've got court decisions to go on, but it requires governments to move forward. The mandate letter, I see it as something that, well, the ministers have to take a responsibility for and be accountable for. And where the Métis Nation is concerned, I'm seeing some movement.
All right, going to Gilbert Whitetuck joining us on the phone from Kitigan ZB. Gilbert, you've seen many governments go through. What do you think about this Liberal government 1 year in?
Well, my first impression, like everyone else, I mean, a lot of good words. I mean, at best they've been putting out good words, but the delivery is another thing. And we can be talking, of course, I'm as concerned as anyone else in regards to the environment, what's happening on our territories, but I'm also very concerned about the children and education and whatnot. And there's been a trickle-down effect of funding into the communities to improve what's going on, and the government's known very well what the need is, and the flow of that funding to help communities really get into the groove is not happening. And in regards to children in foster care also, I mean, the tribunal ruled very clearly. I'm not sure why there isn't that movement. I know that the Minister Bennett, is very busy, is visiting a lot of First Nations, and I'm very pleased that she is listening, listening to people. But I'm not seeing that, you know, being transcribed into action on the ground that's meaningful for families, meaningful for people who are in dire straits, who are living in poverty. If we can't take care of the people, it means also we're not taking care of the land. How can people really rally together when they're not well? Sometimes I get the impression it's almost like something that's wished so that people will not pull together and grow stronger. So I'm a strong believer that because this is not happening, we're really at a crossroad again. And what I'd be looking for is for the government to clearly commit not only what it's going to do, but when it's going to do it, and have a time frame attached to it. And let's have a report card, an annual report card, that will demonstrate or show to First Nations and to Canadians whether or not the federal government is indeed living up to its obligation. and including the full implementation of the UN Declaration, the full implementation of the TRC recommendations. I'm not seeing that. I'm not getting that feeling in the community that all of those things are happening. And we should not be looking at taking baby steps. This has to be leaps and bounds. It can't be incremental. It's got to be leaps and bounds. We can't wait any longer. So it's very important to go beyond the words and in the action and be speaking, more directly with First Nations and ensuring that the bureaucracy, that big machine called bureaucracy, is not creating, putting the stick in the wheel of what communities want to do. Because the bureaucracy also, even though the politicians may wish and say a lot of things, the bureaucracy who have been working under a conservative government may still be stuck in that mentality.
So many things that our guests are saying today, and these opening comments are reflected in that speech that Justin Trudeau gave before the Assembly of First Nations. But let's hear him say that in front of the Assembly of First Nations, where he outlined his government's top priorities last December.
We have made this inquiry a priority for our government because those touched by this national tragedy have waited long enough. The victims deserve justice, their families an opportunity to heal and to be heard. We must work together to put an end to this ongoing tragedy. A second priority will be to make significant investments in First Nations education. This is one funding area where we know we can't afford to wait, and we won't. Every child and young person living in Canada deserves a real and fair chance at success. First Nations students are no less deserving. We will never impose solutions from the top down. We know that this approach is wrong, and we know it doesn't work. While we share a commitment to improving education outcomes, we believe that education reforms that affect First Nations children must be led by First Nations.
They definitely got a good response at that AFN meeting with those top priorities. Caleb, he seems in line with what the people want. But what do the Liberals do differently than the Conservatives?
I think they hide behind their public persona. In my opinion, what we're seeing is risk management. This isn't reconciliation. This is strategically engaging with Indigenous people as a mechanism to ensure regulations, ensure property rights, ensure their cabinet economic agenda and climate change agenda goes forward, and a mechanism to ensure their reputation. This isn't reconciliation. They hide behind the consultation obligation as a mechanism to slow down the process. And you see that in natural resources. They gave back $900 million. The Missing and Murdered Women's Inquiry doesn't have subpoena powers. So, lovely words, great, but in my opinion, this is risk management. Trudeau created Idle No More. They understood what they did. So now it's a question of how do you manage the risk of no DAPL? How do you manage the risk of Indigenous people actually coming together, as Chief Gilbert said? And I think that's what we're seeing. I'm sorry to say it. It gives me no joy to say it, but that's my opinion, quite frankly.
Cheryl, what do you feel that the Liberals are doing differently than the previous Conservative government?
Well, when we talk about the previous Conservative government, and I tend to look to the U.S. right now, at least we're not dealing with that government then. That government had no intentions of even letting us into the room or having a conversation with us. But this government still has to go much further. Like I said earlier, it's the soft markers, the things that they already have jurisdiction or accepted responsibility to do that they're doing. The tougher things on reconciliation and the implementation and the carrying out of the inquiry have all slowed down. The other concern I have is some of the areas with veterans and our age and residential school survivors being reinstituted again, not having the support they have to stay in their homes for the last years. These types of things are imminent. Feel intimate problems are communities, our elders, and our veterans are facing, and they can't afford to wait to the next term of the federal government. So they started, but they can't, they need to implement these things within this term. And those are immediate needs. But the comparison to the Conservative government to now, we have to be optimistic, because at least we're having a conversation with this government. I've been able to see the minister several times in our region. That never happened under the Conservative reign at all. It was 7 years since we had a meeting with the federal minister in Nova Scotia. So, you know, I'm hopeful that at least we're in the room with them. There is a conversation started. But in regards to veterans, elders, and children in care, we can't afford to wait till the next term of the Liberal government to meet those commitments.
And Tony Belcourt, you've seen different Conservative governments and Liberal governments in power, but what would you say the Liberals, this Liberal government, is doing much differently than the previous Conservative government?
Well, first of all, I want to preface my remarks by making it clear that the situation of the Métis Nation is much different than it is for First Nations. We don't fall under the Indian Act, and so we haven't been dealing with all of the bureaucracy around the Indian Act. Unfortunately, on the other hand, we've had to be dealing with the bureaucracies of the provinces. As far as the Liberals are concerned, I think there's two clear things that we can point to that are different. Number one is there is an inquiry on missing and murdered Indigenous women, children, girls, and transgender. And there may be some flaws. They may not have full authority that Caleb suggested they should have, but at least we've got the inquiry. That's something that's completely different. The other are these mandate letters. I've tried to do some research on finding out whether or not the Conservatives ever put out any, and they didn't. Now, it's important for us to have a table of negotiations with the federal government. We've never, ever had that. All we've had is, you know, we broke down the doors in the 70s and we were able to get some core funding. And so, you know, a little bit of money just to help so that we can organize and have some kind of a platform to speak. But now we're talking about actually having a table of negotiations on important subjects. You know, we're now starting to get some data on Métis people, for example, and our healthcare conditions. The situation concerning diabetes is 4 times the national average.
For Métis people,
that's horrific.
Tony, I'll have to just interject in there in a moment. Some of those issues we will be getting to, but we do have to go to a break now, and we'll be taking your calls in the next block. For the viewers, phone us toll free now at 1-877-647-2786. Next, we'll put more of the Liberals' promises and priorities in focus. Join our conversation now. Send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca. Like our APTN InFocus Facebook page. Follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus, or call in toll free at 1-877-647-2786. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau himself said the relationship with Indigenous peoples is sacred. Let's go to social media now to hear what some of you are saying about today's topic. Diane Michano-Richard says, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals made empty promises to get our votes. It all seemed okay up until the election and when the honeymoon stage was over. We're back in the same situation. Some good has come, but not too much is changing since the Harper government. Lou Jobs tweets, housing still sucks. Education is still not equally funded. Still no clean drinking water and no health care. Allison Noni Richards tweets, it seems like many promises are being broken. I voted for change, not more of the same. Daphne Strauss says infrastructure money is flowing. First Nation leaders have access to Indigenous Affairs Minister, which they never had under the Conservatives. and Icelandic Métis says he is doing okay, but not fully engaged with Native people. Site C has not been explained. We're going to go to a caller on the line now. We have Michelle calling in from Calgary. Michelle, what do you think of the Liberal government 1 year in? We have Michelle on the line from Calgary. Hello, Michelle. We're just waiting for my colleague in the control room, Bruce, to push the right button. That's the way we roll on live TV and taking callers. Maybe we should move on to someone else, or are you going to punch the right button there and get Michelle up?
Hello?
Hello, Michelle.
Hi.
Hi.
So
Tell us.
I'm quite biased. I'm going to be honest. I'm with the Indigenous Peoples Commission for the Liberal Party of Canada. So when I heard we need a report card, I have a 3-page report card in front of me of all of the things that I feel I have seen this Liberal government do. I think I'd like to also back up to the point that Harper would not talk to us, and in fact he would impose so much onto us that we had to result into I don't know more. And it was imperative that we get rid of Harper, and that was the biggest talking point that we used to try to get people to vote out the Harper government. I mean, out east there were places that were more NDP friendly, and that is where we encouraged whatever strategic vote it takes to get rid of Harper. We got rid of Harper. That's number one. We have the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Inquiry. I personally have been to some of the pre-meetings. I was at Siksika First Nation when the school had opened. I have three pages of things that I can say that the Trudeau government has done, and being able to contact Carolyn Bennett and Justin Trudeau on issues is something that really matters. And for the first time, we're hearing, the Métis flag being raised on Parliament Hill. I'll acknowledge that it's Louis Riel Day. There's so many things to say. It's hard for me to listen to hear what's happening and not acknowledge that we have 400 years of colonialism to undo. It can't be overnight done. So I think we do have to start focusing on a lot more of the positive things. It's a big step to start acknowledging UNDRIP and start using the term Indigenous. So many people still use the term Aboriginal, Indian, Native, all of these terms that were imposed upon us. And Indigenous was the one term that we've decided we want, and now this government is not just acknowledging it, but they changed the Indian Affairs to Indigenous Affairs. So I really could go on for a long period of time of all of the positive things that we've done, having, Justice Sinclair appointed as an independent senator, getting rid of the Financial Transparency Act that was imposed and with no consultation. We have all sorts of people that are on boards that were never there before. I can think of Dawn Lavelle-Harvard. I can think of Michelle Audette. These are just off the top of my head. All the calls to action, we've outright said that we were going to unequivocally implement all of the calls to action and UNDRIP. Carolyn Bennett went to the United Nations herself to say it. I know that people like to, twist a few of the words said about how it doesn't work into Canadian law, but it doesn't mean that overall we are not working at trying to find those solutions and frameworks. This is multilateral government implementation. For example, here in Alberta, we have a NDP government, the first one in 44 years. Such a breath of fresh air. They say that they're going to implement the TRC and UNDRIP, which is fantastic because we have willing partners at the federal level. But we're not there yet. We're working on it at many levels, but it's going to take time, and that's not, excluding the municipal government's role, especially when it comes to justice reforms of the TRC calls to actions and such. So we have multi-level work that still needs to be done, and, I'm a big proponent that what is the solution? What is the solution? And, we're working on our communications with Indigenous people so that way it gets out there. But at the same time, I am not going to sit here and deny that our reserves and a lot of areas in Canada need immediate help right now. One of the most empowering things Justin Trudeau said to the Aboriginal Peoples Commission was that we never have to choose between being Indigenous or a Liberal. And as that has given us much power to be able to say, this is what's happening in the far north. This is what's happening in the Ochis Nation. This is what's happening over here. Wherever it is that we need to shine a light on, we have that communication, and I don't believe we've ever had that before. I've seen the other parties, and in the Conservative Party, they have no Aboriginal Peoples Commission, so they have no direct link of what is really happening on the ground to what's going on in the party, let alone what's going on to the Government of Canada. So there's so many wonderful things to talk about, the changes that have happened. I mean, I came from Alberta, where Jim Prentice, the former Indian Affairs Minister, wouldn't acknowledge missing and murdered Indigenous women inquiry, rest in peace. And Harper, missing and murdered Indigenous women weren't on the radar. So as an Indigenous woman living in Alberta, to have Rachel Notley and have Justin Trudeau both willing to work on this is a breath of fresh air, and I would like to acknowledge all of that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, Michelle, but clearly there's a lot of people who disagree with you, and we don't have to get into the fine nuts and bolts of that, but what do you think is going to sway more people's opinion into thinking Justin Trudeau's term is going to be over next time? Oh,
I think that it's unrealistic to think that he's not going to be in next time. In the non-Indigenous world, they're the greatest voting bloc, and they think that, Justin Trudeau's doing a great job. We all know, Indigenous people know better. However, that doesn't mean that they're not laying foundations to start that change, and they are willing partners. I mean, Carolyn Bennett, she has been out and about more times than I ever seen the previous Indian Affairs ministers, and I call them Indian Affairs Minister because I still live under the Indian Act Imposed Status card. So, I think we just have to be honest and look at the bigger picture of it's going to take a lot to change the direction of this huge ship that's turning.
All right.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for your contributions. Caleb, you seem like you want to jump in there.
Yeah, I got some fairly significant responses. Like Michelle, I don't mean to be disrespectful of what's been done, and I realize there's a lot of good things, in particular ministerial access. But you talk about these things that we're doing and this structure that we're building, and you talk about laying foundation. What about the foundation of Site C? $9.5 billion in antiquated energy infrastructure. What about the incipient approval of Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain? The Liberals are, even under the guise of climate change engagement, they're building a foundation that disrespects Indigenous rights, it doesn't allow Indigenous consent, and puts the Canadian economy in bed with big oil, which is what Harper did. So respectfully, I hear you, and there is a lot of good, and I don't mean to be the naysayer and disrespect that, but how can you possibly say that this is a government that's respecting Indigenous people when they're trapping us and making us wage slaves and not building an alternative economy that's based in renewable resources, for example? Crazy idea. We need Kinder Morgan, and that's what's happening. There's a reason I'm wearing this. This is global now.
Water is life. Yeah. And there's also that end of the discussion that says, there's not just the Canadian Federation that Indigenous peoples have to fit in. Just thought I'd add that point there. But Tony, what would you say? What is the Liberal government doing right?
Well, I have to say that starting off with these mandate letters is the first important and right thing that the Prime Minister did. In these mandate letters, which are quite lengthy, he says in a number of times that the ministers are going to be held accountable to deliver what it is that they've been mandated to do. So that means these ministers are going to be they're going to keep their feet to the fire.
Yes,
there
that's all about
going,
politics. Yes, the whole
that's
politics
right.
of it all. Mm-hmm.
The fact is that there are some things that are going on that are conflicting. There's no question about it. And this whole push about resource development on the one hand, without an equal kind of push on preservation of the environment and protection of waters. I'm glad to see Caleb's got that T-shirt with "Water is Life." I mean, that's critical. There's got to be a balance here, and I'm quite honestly, I don't see that there is in terms of the focus. The other thing is the minister's responsibility is to implement recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. starting with the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Well, we have to hold her accountable to it. Prime Minister is going to hold her accountable to it. So we have to hold her accountable to it. Now, I'm not an apologist for the Liberal Party or the minister, but, you know, I've been in Ottawa now, unfortunately, for 45 years, watching what's been going on here. And over, there is a power of that bureaucracy. And you can't get in it and turn it like this is a huge, huge ocean liner, and you can only start turning the darn thing a degree at a time. You just can't swing it around that fast. Mm-hmm. So we have to realize that. On the other hand, we don't have to accept that things are not going in the right direction, or that they're not going in the right direction fast enough. We have to keep putting the pressure on. But at the same time, I think we have to acknowledge that, you know, they are doing some things right.
Yes, and this whole adversarial system of the Canadian government demands that people stand up for what they believe in. We're going to another caller on the line. We have Melissa calling from Chester, Nova Scotia. Melissa, what do you have to say about the Liberal government 1 year in?
Why, hello. Yes, I believe that Prime Minister Trudeau is smiling out of the right of his mouth and lying from the left. I believe it's an absolute disgrace that Indigenous groups are still fighting for recognition, such as the Passamaquoddy and the Snakes Nation in BC. And I strongly urge the Prime Minister to recognize these Indigenous groups as human beings with constitutional and Aboriginal rights. The Snakes people were declared extinct in 1956, are currently in BC courts fighting for their Aboriginal rights. My partner, Robert Watt, has been fighting for the right to free passage across the international border for the past 20 years and is still fighting to remain within his traditional Snakes territory in BC. And I would just like to say, Caleb, thank you for everything you do. You're a complete breath of fresh air. You really give us some hope seeing youth like yourself speaking on behalf of
I'm not very youthful.
us. And if you have time, my partner could really use a good lawyer.
Okay. All right, that's going into another jurisdiction of the show. Thank you very much for your comments, Melissa. I really appreciate it. Gilbert, if we still have you on the line, tell us what's one thing that the Liberal government has to do right now to make things right or even better for Indigenous peoples?
They got to make sure that they're going to act quickly in regards to our children, the children in our communities and in the urban centers, that the kind of programs and services that all children deserve, that Canadians receive and First Nations children don't receive, that they will begin immediately or within the next coming months, that they will begin to receive that. And we can't wait. Like I said before, it can't be incremental. It's got to be a big leap, a leap of faith that this is possible. And yes, indeed, as I'm listening to the discussion, yes, there have been things that have been happening. We all understand that. I understand that the minister has been very accessible and listening. But again, there has to be action on the ground. And our children, our territories are very important, and the sustainability of our territories. But our children who right now, over 20,000 in care and foster care, the level of suicide and all of that. We can't wait any longer. And the best example I always give is that if I were to arrive at the scene of an accident, well, I can't just sit back and say we're going to have a discussion, we're going to decide who we're going to bring to the hospital, who we're going to declare dead. We're going to move quickly and take care of everyone immediately, and then figure out what happened. Right now, I'm not seeing that immediate action, that emergency. I don't feel it, that there's an emergency. The level of the the housing situation, of some measure and some level of the situation of addictions in our community, that pain that our people are carrying. I mean, something's got to happen. The people are not asking to live with that pain. They're just asking to be accompanied, to be supported, to bring about change so that they can take care of their families, which they were always very capable. But colonization and all of these other things have come in the way. It's time. I can't every time I listen to APTN news and I hear of a suicide or a missing and murdered, Aboriginal person, it hurts me tremendously saying, in 2016, why are we continuing to put up with that and saying, you know what, we're going to give it another year. You know what, things are going really so well, we're doing everything. We want to reconciliate with you. Well, until we've taken care of our children, I think we're still a long way from that.
All right. Caleb, what do you think about that when you heard that Justin Trudeau is going to implement all of the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission?
That's a lovely thing to say. It's real hard to do. I'm no longer technically a lawyer, a point for watchers. I resigned in disgrace. I'm disgusted by colonial legal systems and what they do. But I understand the complexity. And, Minister Raybould's challenging situation, not being able to fully implement UNDRIP as a matter of Canadian law. I mean, those recommendations are societal. And quite frankly, they're not all our job. A bunch of that is the job of the settlers. And you're seeing that, like the settler ally movement is developing and people are beginning to be accountable for colonization and their privilege derived directly therefrom, and that's a good step. But my concern is that essentially at the core we are getting manipulated again, and we live in a time, Chief Gilbert, you mentioned, scene of an accident. Like, we're in triage mode as a species, and every traditionalist I've ever met, every person who lives on the land is telling me things are crazy and things are changing. Climate change is real. It matters. This is a global problem. And so I don't believe that we have the time to sort of tinker with the machinery. And so when I see, we're going to implement 94 recommendations, like, yeah, great, do it. Stop suing us.
Yes, definitely so many things that we could touch on there. But we do have to go to another break because we're coming up with final thoughts that we'll put in focus, and we have a lot of feedback that we got on this question from our social media this week. We'll get to that and more, and here's one last listen to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
These are just 5 of the commitments we've made as part of our efforts to repair this most important relationship. There are many other actions we will undertake, from partnering with First Nations as we review and monitor major resource development projects, to providing significant new funding to help promote, preserve, and protect Indigenous languages and cultures, to working together on essential infrastructure projects from water to roads.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau himself said the relationship with the Indigenous peoples is sacred. We're going to go to some more social media about what you're saying about today's topic at the fancy touchscreen that we have here. Thunderdrum says, Justin Trudeau recognized our sovereignty without the paternal or racial supremacy. Lori Q. Cameron says, stop all fossil fuel use and train people for jobs in green tech, become world leaders, then have tea. Halinette says, how about Justin Trudeau starts fulfilling his promises? See Attawapiskat. Dwayne Acon says, I voted Liberal in the last federal election. It's still early and they have made some good changes, but some of their decisions don't seem very much different from the previous Harper government. And Lynn Geary tells us, more positive changes for Indigenous peoples in one short year than ever before in history. I'd like to go to Cheryl. We haven't heard from you in a little while. Have there been more changes to the good for Indigenous peoples than ever before?
There's been lots of changes. We've had 10 years of Harper, so I can't disagree that there's been a lot of changes. But we are in triage mode in this country, and Indigenous peoples from coast to coast to coast are dealing with the resource extraction issues. And what I'm finding with this government is that they're not, they're silent. They're not making decisions. They're not living up to their words. They're standing by silently, letting industries and provinces do what they want with rights. One of the issues here we've asked them is to protect our fish in the Shubenacadie River. And And what our argument is that if you want to recognize a resource, then you have to protect the resource too. So there's a stewardship piece to that his ministers are not acting on. There's also the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. We're happy the inquiry's been called, and we're happy that they consulted with families, but it's been rather quiet. I know a lot of families and women are waiting across the country. And one of the other things that I want to raise that I've raised before, and the Minister Bennett, several other people, we've been raising it, is missing and murdered Indigenous men. Their numbers are double the numbers of Aboriginal women, and that's an area that's not been looked at or addressed, and it's not on their mandate letter. But I just wanted to raise it here that this is one area that I feel that we need to act on in this country.
Yes, not just women. We're going to go to a caller on the line. We have Ia. Ia, what do you have to add to our conversation here about the Liberals 1 year in?
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for speaking your truth. I believe that we're dealing with complicity of spiritual cultural genocide. A lot of words to divide us as a people, as original people, including our power. All machinery uses water. So first and foremost, there's the lack of respect. We entrenched the spirit and intent of our natural law, or Jinupawakan, original instruction. Goa would have a future. Clean energy, we've always had that. We have the technology. I mean, they've known we could run engines on water since the 40s. So it's ongoing, and it's grassroots. Our prayers out there for all of us that we go through this in a good way, because I believe entrenching our natural law and the spiritual intentions in the Constitution will help us.
Thank you very much, Ia, for your thoughts. Really appreciate it. Caleb, Ia brought up the subject of genocide. What's your stance on the Government of Canada guilty of genocide?
Yeah.
Or is that even a point?
Okay, so I have a big issue with that term, cultural genocide. That's a term of art. You know, it's not cultural genocide, it's genocide, period. End of story. Colonization is genocidal. That's the starting point. And in my opinion, you know, as I said, what you do is more important than what you say. And if you look at what's happening at a systemic level in this country, there's lots of good movement, but there's actual lot of money and bulldozers and people and welders building things that are trapping us in a very, very dangerous system. And, you know, it's interesting, the caller mentioned natural law. I did a Twitter feed post and a Facebook post asking people what they would make him do. And one person said he has to go smoke the sacred pipe that his dad was given in '83 during the constitutional renegotiations and the self-government approach. You know, other friends said, you know, give back the headdress until every feather's earned. Other people said, get rid of the tattoo. Challenging.
I don't like that Trudeau has that headdress and has that Haida design tattoo. Definitely a subject that we could talk more about, but let it be known that that's what some of our viewers are expressing to us. We're going to go to another caller on the line. We have Steve calling from Brantford. Steve, what do you have to say about the Liberals 1 year in?
Same old story. The thing that I can't get away from is that the Liberal government under Trudeau, the same as all the governments in Canada throughout the history of colonization, they represent colonizer capitalist thought and worldview, and that's always been diametrically opposed to First Nations thought and worldview. And at this point in history, at least in terms of military might and global dominance, the colonizer capitalist is still in charge. And the message to First Nations, as long as the colonizer capitalist is still in charge, the message is the same. It remains the same worldwide. And the message is assimilate or die. And just a brief comment on something Caleb just said. That term, cultural genocide, right on. Throw it out. It is genocide. Don't pretty it up with the word cultural. Thanks for taking my call.
Thank you very much, Steve. Really appreciate that. Tony, how do you feel about what Steve had to say, particularly on the point where the message to Indigenous peoples is assimilate or die?
Well, that's not going to happen. I don't care who says it. We're not going to assimilate. We're not going to die. I think we're proving every day that we are Indigenous peoples that are here to stay. Look, we've got the fastest growing young population in the country. What we need to do is, or what the federal government's got to do is, it's not only going to have these important directives to the ministers, it's going to also now start to put some money on the table. You take a look at what the Conservatives used to do, which is hold up the flow of funding so that by the end of the year, every department would not have been able to spend all its money, so then it lapses money, it goes back into the Treasury. And last year, there was a lapse of $900 million. That's ridiculous that it should be lapsed. There was a cut in language training or language funding from $15 million to $5 million. Get that restored. We have huge problems concerning child and family services. Now, the way we deal with these things between the Métis and First Nations is differently. Unfortunately, we've got to be dealing with the provinces, but the federal government's got to come to the table for us on that too, because we've got huge problems. How can we implement our inherent right of self-government, self-determination? How can we implement self-government for ourselves if we're not going to take charge of our children? That's going to require a new infusion of monies. We need a new infusion of monies for youth. Why can't there be some councils, youth councils perhaps, that sit down with our youth and be able to determine what do they want to do? Ask them, what do you want to do? How do you want to, what do you aspire to do, and what do you need to get there? And make sure there's a pool of resources to be able to help them. It takes money. You've got to bring it to the table.
Cheryl Maloney, you talked about the role of Indigenous people in all of these Liberal promises. Where do you think Indigenous peoples need to take things?
I think, you know, I'll take UNDRIP for an example. You know, the federal government said, you know, it's going to be difficult to implement free, prior, informed consent. And I think Indigenous peoples across the country have to take some responsibility there. And we have to organize our nations. The treaties and the Aboriginal rights are not held by Indian Act band councils. They are held by nations and traditional districts. And we need to organize ourselves. And that organization has to start with the chiefs, even though they don't carry the treaty rights or the Aboriginal rights. They are the de facto governments, and they have to go in and reorganize themselves, work with their Indigenous governments, the traditional governments, the territories, the districts. And then it's going to be a lot easier for this government to deal with us. And it's going to be a lot harder for this government to deal with us, because then they'll have to meet those international standards of nation to nation. Yes. So I think that's where we need to go, and I think the government will then follow. Okay. Right now, asking them to implement free, prior, informed consent is a little premature.
All right, we're going to go. We have one more comment from Michelle is back, our earlier caller speaking very much strongly for Liberal government. Michelle, what's the one last comment you want to add to our conversation?
I think what we need to work on is that framework that we all want to implement, because if it just comes from the provincial and federal governments, then it will continue to look like imposed government. So I think we need to be working together at creating those frameworks so that they can implement it, because right now most levels of government are quite interested in working with us if we give them the framework.
All right. And Caleb, we'll go to you for one last comment on the discussion with the Liberals today.
It doesn't give me any joy to say it, but this is a government that's more insidious and dangerous to Indigenous people in the long term, because they look so friendly and they have the right words. They've understood how to manipulate us at a collective level, And now we have to figure out what we're going to do. And I don't want to discredit the good work they're doing. I think there's a bigger agenda about climate change and legacy that they're going to throw nations like mine in my territory under the bus to accomplish. And I think that's a dangerous thing. So must be shown to all the people, Michelle in particular, for calling in, and to you for hosting this. This is an important discussion. I'm privileged to be part of it, but it's dangerous. This is a dangerous time, and that's the truth, in my opinion.
Wow. All right. There's so many strong opinions that we've heard here today. I think we're out of time. I'd like to thank you very much to our guests. We have Cheryl Maloney joining us from Halifax. Tony Belcourt is in Ottawa. Gilbert Whiteduck is on the line from Kitigan ZB. And, of course, Caleb Bain here in our studio. Hope you'll join us again next week. Dwayne Howard will be here. He starred in that blockbuster movie, The Revenant, and he has quite a story to share. That's live next Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific and 3 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be taking your social media comments, so be sure to stay tuned and join in our conversation, and we really appreciate you tuning in to APTN in Focus. Have a good day. I'm Cheryl McKenzie. Take care.